And while the jury deliberates that very case, communities all over the country, really all over the world, are grappling with police shootings. What do we do about them? We saw some in Detroit and San Antonio get little attention over the weekend. And since the Chauvin trial began, the New York Times reports at least 64 people have been killed by law enforcement. With states passing more than 140 new police reform laws, the question is, are they enough? I want to bring in a man who knows best, Dr. Philip Antiba Goff. He's the CEO of the Center for Policing Equity and a professor of African American Studies and Psychology at Yale. Always good to have you here. Philip, states have passed, I just said it, over 140 police reform bills since George Floyd was killed. But that's just states. How badly do we need federal action?
So it's a tricky question because people are paying attention to the federal comings and goings, but most of this stuff happens at the local level. So of the 140 reforms passed at the state level, almost all of those were off the shelf from President Obama's task force. It's things like better training, mandatory bar on bans on chokeholds, banning no-knocks, banning tear gas. It's the stuff that makes things a little bit less deadly, a little bit less dangerous. But in terms of federal work, what we're looking for there is leadership. And what that's going to look like is not just about reforms, but saying that the way we keep people safe is not just making police better, but taking police out of the places where they don't need to be. We want federal leadership in that direction, signals in that direction. And from there, what we hope for is that local leaders will take up the struggle from that. Well, so in places like Berkeley, like where they've said no more low-level traffic enforcement. In places like Ithaca, where they're dismantling the whole department and they're putting together a department of community solutions and public safety that's civilian-led, majority unarmed, and there will be no armed responses to non-violent crises. That's the hope of what comes next.
Well, there's other things happening on the local level, too. Take Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis just signed a controversial bill, an anti-riot bill. You know, anti-riot on its face, people could say, sure. But what it does is crack down on protests. How damaging is a bill like that to the cause of overall improving policing?
So let's talk just a quick second about what words mean, because this anti-riot bill is probably designed to crack down on Quiet Riot, the band. It says that if you're 3 or more people, you can be declared a riot by whatever law enforcement is there. And riotous actions include hurling mean words. One of the components of the bill is that if you're convicted or if you're charged with this, you have to be held in custody until your trial, which means no chance of bail in that context. It's a logistic nightmare. It's a moral failing, and it's heading in exactly the wrong direction from where the rest of the country wants everybody to go. It's sad, it's disappointing, and it honestly is part of the tradition of not keeping us safe, but using public safety as a weapon against vulnerable communities.
And let's be clear, the banned Quiet Riot needs no reforms. We're not talking, though, when we talk about police shootings, about low-level crimes. We have seen shootings where police did do the right thing, or they were caught in very dangerous situations. When we look at reform, how do we balance those concerns with also fighting systemic racism?
Yeah, so it is tricky for someone who is leading at the local level, who's seeing an unprecedented national surge in murder. Murder's bad, and we're used to relying on law enforcement to help us out with that. But I want to be clear, law enforcement are not the people that stop murder. It feels like it. We've been told that for a really long time. But if somebody breaks into your home, law enforcement's not going to catch them in the middle of the act. They're going to show up after it's over. So the best way to prevent murder is to give communities the resources they need so they don't feel so desperate in the first place. That's not a policing issue. That's a resources issue. That's a job and substance use and mental health issue. That's an education issue. So I understand that right now it feels like, well, we just got to have police because there's so much violence going on. But I want to be clear, police respond after the fact almost all the time. And the things that cause violence in communities in the first place, those are the areas that law enforcement have been asking to get out of for decades themselves.
Philip, I always want to talk to you, but yesterday when I was watching the closing arguments, I knew I wanted to. The prosecution made a point to say this is not about police, this is about Derek Chauvin. What do you think about that argument? Because for weeks we've been hearing this is about policing in America.
Yeah, so if the trial is a metaphor for what we're doing in the United States, I gotta say a lot of communities are just going to be devastated regardless of the outcome. Because in one case, you have the potential of an acquittal, God forbid, or a conviction on manslaughter but not murder, which means that he's convicted of an oopsie. That's not going to feel good for anybody who worries that they or their children or their family might be next. But on the other side, if this isn't policing, then what are we to make of the 3 killings a day perpetrated by law enforcement every year since we started keeping track, which is only 5 years ago? Right? Police contact has been down, arrests have been down, all other crime other than murder has been down, but the killings have stayed constant even in this year of quarantine and COVID. So if this isn't policing, if this can't be talked about as an indictment of the system of policing, then what the heck do we do to prevent the next one? Because this was such an egregious and aggravated incident that it's almost a caricature of what communities are protesting in the streets right now.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.